Hello, everyone, and welcome to a mini podcast Q&A with Dorian Soanes, Megan Davies, and myself, Maximilian Burrell. We are speaking from Biospan. And what Biospan is, we're a personalised nutrition clinic. We make personalised nutrition plans to help people with chronic illnesses, and at the moment, we're focusing on type 2 diabetes because type 2 diabetes is reversible through nutrition. Now, to kick things off, I'm going to allow everyone here to introduce themselves. My name is Maxi. I'm the founder of Biospan, CEO, running it at the moment, helping build a team. Dorian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Dorian Soanes. I'm a nutritional therapist, and I have particular interest in type 2 diabetes and other metabolic conditions.
Very nice.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I work in Biospan as an intern.
Yep, fantastic. So what Megan's been doing is Megan's actually been inside diabetes groups on Facebook, learning to understand and know your questions, basically, what you want answered. So today we're actually going to be going over real life questions and concerns that people have. And so without further ado, let's kick it off. Let's get a question going.
So the first question I see quite a lot is that people don't know where to start once they're diagnosed with diabetes type 2. I was wondering if you had any advice on how people can get the right resources and where they can go from firstly initially being diagnosed.
Yeah. So when you get diagnosed, obviously the first thing, I think most people probably understand that nutrition plays a part in the development or outcomes in type 2 diabetes. So the first thing I would say that you don't do is go on Google and type in nutrition for type 2 diabetes, because you're going to get bombarded with every single opinion under the sun. It's often curated by what Google thinks is the best resources anyway, and to be honest, it's going to present more confusion than it will actual answers. So that's the first thing. The second thing to understand is, although with conventional medicine, what we like to do is we categorize disease. So type 2 diabetes is a disease. You've got type 2 diabetes. That's the same as this other guy over here who's got type 2 diabetes, or the same as this other person who's got type 2 diabetes. And that's just the disease or the condition, the pathology underlying it is the same, but the how that might develop in each person, that can be extremely unique and individual. And actually, people from type 2 with type 2 diabetes have all kinds of different backgrounds, and because of this, their environment is out of balance with their biology in a different way for each of them. So that's the second thing. So obviously I'm biased, but I would say the third thing is you should see a nutritional therapist, specifically a nutritional therapist that's been trained in functional medicine. Functional medicine is essentially root cause medicine. What functional medicine does is it looks at you as an individual, and this isn't a 10-minute appointment that just diagnoses a disease based on some blood tests. You take a deep dive into your health history, and that's everything. That's everything from whether you were breastfed as a baby to, have you been inoculated against certain viruses? Did you get certain viruses? Did you get shingles 5 years ago? Are you a sedentary person? What are your dietary habits? Everything. And we try and pick apart what the triggers are in what's contributed to your pathology. And when you can identify that, you can start to address it, and you can start to improve outcomes, and often in some cases reverse pathology. You can say something, Maxi?
Yeah, Dorian, I was just thinking, it's interesting what you say. So like with functional medicine, you look over someone's life and go from start to finish. And
yeah,
where do you think type 2 diabetes starts? I mean, like not like physiologically, but I mean like the triggers. Like, does it start in teenhood? Does it start when a certain habits? Like, at what point do you think is the first step?
So it's obviously, like I said, it's like hugely variable from person to person. But in general, the modern environment sort of is not a great fit for our biology in general when it comes to type 2 diabetes. That's why we have an obesity epidemic. That's why we have a type 2 diabetes epidemic and a metabolic health epidemic. And really, from when you're born to when you're older, there are multiple factors that contribute to the development of this sort of pathology. Things like more sedentary lives is obviously a massive factor. Processed food, the amount of processed food as a percentage in your diet is more likely to make you overeat. It's more likely to dysregulate your blood sugar. It's more likely to contribute to poor metabolic health. And then things like, loss of muscle mass is a massive factor. Muscle mass being like where you put most of your blood glucose. It's literally a sink for energy and for blood glucose. So what the most common, we see people get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes generally later in life, sort of after 50. And that probably ties in with the fact that they've got declining muscle mass, and all of a sudden they have got less place to put the blood glucose. But that's a simplistic way of looking at it. That's part of the problem, but not all of it. There are actually, like kids, it used to be called old age diabetes. You have type 1 diabetes, which people may know is an autoimmune disease, and it's more frequently diagnosed in children, although adults can develop it as well. And that's actually an autoimmune disease that attacks the cells of the pancreas that makes insulin. So you're incapable of making insulin. And then there's type 2 diabetes, which is a metabolic condition. It used to be old age diabetes because we wouldn't see people getting it until they were very old. But now we see younger people getting it, even teenagers and even children getting it. So it's very, it can be very different. And often we see kids getting it in populations who were only very recently westernized. So like some Native American populations are very prone to diabetes. And that's because, only a few hundred years ago, that they have hardly any exposure to agriculture. They were exposed to Western diets only a few hundred years ago. So their adaptation, the amount of adaptation they've had to that is much less. So their biology is more separated from their environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think I heard in a podcast the other day, which is quite interesting, is it's measured by nature. The further away we get from nature, the more we see diseases like this rise. Which is quite that's fascinating. Honestly,
that's definitely true, and we're not the only species. We witness that with animals in captivity as well. Is when they're given an environment or a diet that does not match their niche in the wild, you see the disease develop. So yeah, that's definitely true. And I was just to come back to the original question, I gave 3 points. Okay, my third was to see a nutritional therapist or someone who's trained in functional medicine, which there are some doctors that are as well. It's not just nutritional therapists. But the fourth point would be, I've made a video on type 2 diabetes, which will go on the Biospan YouTube. And I've also written a blog on type 2 diabetes, which will go on the Biospan website. And those are really good resources on places to start. And again, the advice is generalized, but that is the best generalized advice that I could give for type 2 diabetes.
I like the point you made about how a lack of muscle mass can contribute to your type 2 diabetes. Yeah. And a question that gets asked quite a lot is, what exercises are best for reducing blood glucose or the effects of blood glucose rising? Yeah,
this is absolutely my favorite question. So we live in a paradigm where, people, the conventional view is, type 2 diabetes, you've eaten too much calories, and you need to reduce calories, and anything that helps burn more calories is beneficial. So there is like most good lies, there is a certain amount of truth in that there is a certain amount of truth in overconsumption leading to pathology. It's not quite as simple as that, but that is a sort of a cause of the disease. But if we think about things this way, we're going to think, well, what's the thing that burns the most calories? How can I burn the most calories to help my disease? And obviously that's long-distance steady-state cardio. There's no question, there's no debate that long-distance steady-state, if I go and exercise for an hour and I go running versus if I go to the gym and lift some weights, I'm going to burn more calories running than I am doing weights. There's no debate about that. But here's where nuance is important. Although running does burn most calories, it's not going to be beneficial for metabolic disease, and there's a good reason for that. When we exercise, we send an adaptive signal to our bodies, right, that adapts to that specific pressure, that specific stress. Okay, so if you go running, your body wants to be more efficient. It wants to be more efficient so that it can complete that exercise. It can do that exercise better. You know, as you get more efficient, the running gets easier and easier as you get fitter. How do you get more efficient with aerobic exercise? Well, you want to be lighter and you want to burn less calories. You want to conserve energy. You're sending an adaptation signal to conserve energy. So just think about that for a second. You're going out running. You're telling your body, conserve energy. And then you go home or you go back to work and you have a sedentary life and you eat your food, and we're surrounded by plenty. You know, we don't live in an environment of scarcity. We live in an environment of excess and abundance. That's a terrible message to send your body. It's exactly the opposite of what you want to do. You've got high blood glucose because you don't have enough places to put the energy. You don't want to conserve energy. And actually, when we look at even like endurance athletes, there's actually quite a high proportion of those go on to develop cardiometabolic disease. Cyclists and runners, people might know Steve Redgrave, who's the Olympic medalist. If I'm right, and this can be fact checked, I don't like to say things if it's not necessarily true, but I think Steve Redgrave actually has type 2 diabetes. And people think that's amazing because he's a super fit, you know, athletic guy. And how many times have you heard, you know, someone dies of a heart attack and they were a marathon runner or anything like that? Obviously, these are anecdotes, but aerobic exercise does not equal health. You can get very, very, very fit at aerobic exercise and be unhealthy. And part of the reason for that is you are making your body more efficient. What you want to do is you make your body inefficient. That sounds really strange because in a survival situation, obviously, you don't want to be inefficient. Being inefficient would be a terrible survival strategy. You need more food to survive. But in a sedentary lifestyle, that's desirable because that protects you against sitting down all day. It protects you against a sedentary lifestyle, and it protects you against, to a certain amount, consuming more calories. And the best way to do that is to build muscle. Sorry, go on, Maxie.
So does that mean essentially that aerobic exercise, jogging, running, long distance, endurance, it tells your body to slow down, so it will slow down your metabolism and be more efficient at conserving fuel. However, as you said, from type 2 diabetes is a condition where you have too much energy in your blood, so you're not trying to conserve it and make it last longer, you're actually trying to get rid of it. And so that's where weightlifting would come in.
Yeah, look, the like I said, muscle is a glucose sink, which means blood sugar goes into muscle cells and gets stored. Your two biggest glucose sinks is your liver and muscle mass. One of the reasons people get type 2 diabetes, and thin people who are normal weight later in life, is because from the age of 30, unless you do something about it, you're on a downward slope with your muscle mass. And you might not even sit. You might be the same weight, but your body composition is gradually getting worse. So what you said is exactly right. A simplistic way of looking at type 2 diabetes is a disease of energy toxicity almost. That's not technically correct. I know that's not technically correct, but if you elevated triglycerides, which is fat in the blood, elevated blood glucose, which is obviously how you define, it's poor glucose control is how you define type 2 diabetes, and that it's got nowhere to go. Now, muscle cells, they actually have glucose receptors that work independent of insulin. So even if your response to insulin is poor, because you have type 2 diabetes, you have some insulin resistance going on, more muscle will still be a soak. It will still be able to soak up more glucose. And so in my mind, there's no question what's the best exercise to do for type 2 diabetes is resistance training, building muscle. And anyone can do this. There's actually a paper recently that showed that people in their 70s can adapt the same as anyone in their 20s. The response is not going to be as good, but you can adapt to build muscle at any age of your life, and whatever sort of activity you can do. So even if all you can do is get up and sit down because you're very old, you can still build muscle from that. Any volume you add in resistance to building up and getting it down, you can get more muscle. And that's actually going to increase your quality of life as well. And muscle mass is it's people say now it's the organ of longevity muscle, because what we see is it's the people who all-cause mortality. The more frail you are, the more likely you are to die. So that would be my answer to that question. And I just caveat to that is that it's not that you shouldn't do any aerobic exercise. I just think that steady state cardio, elevated steady state cardio, is what causes the adaptation. In an ideal world, what you do is you'd resistance train and you'd walk. So you try and get your 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day. That's very low intensity. That doesn't really create the same adaptation signal. And you do resistance training. And in your walk, you'd be burning, more energy, and keeping your glucose stable. Does that make sense?
Okay, so a quick question then. So, yeah, resistance training, so like weightlifting, resistance, but and so getting muscle will create that glucose sink where all the blood sugar will go, so that you have more places to go, and it does not it doesn't require insulin to work.
No.
So it means if you're insulin resistant, your muscles can still uptake glucose from your blood, and it doesn't require insulin. Now,
Absolutely.
What a question! And walking is also doesn't trigger that response to slow your body down. What about HIIT training?
HIIT training. So I like HIIT training because it's incredibly. So HIIT training stands for HIIT. For anyone that doesn't know, high intensity interval training. So HIIT training would be something like you'd be maybe on a rowing machine or like a bike or something. You go nuts for about 20 seconds and then you sort of take a minute rest and then you do it again, that sort of thing. And maybe you only do that for 12, 15 minutes. So HIIT training, there was the big study that came out about HIIT training about 10 years ago that made it super popular. Was HIIT training was a way of doing aerobic exercise without losing muscle tissue, and it was also shown to burn the most amount of fat. And I'm not going to argue with that. That's absolutely true. My issue with HIIT training is the intensity aspect, which means it's not really scalable for everyone. Personally, I think you should cycle HIIT training. So, maybe you do it for a month or 6 weeks or something, and then you take some time off it. For a lot of people, people over-apply HIIT training because they heard about that study and they think, great, I can keep all my muscle and I can lose a load of fat. And actually, if you do the same thing all the time, your body will just adapt anyway. So it stops being as effective. I would say if you're young and you're listening to this with type 2 diabetes, it's definitely a good tool to incorporate on occasions. But if you're someone who's in their 70s, 80s, 60s, or whatever stage you are, but you're not you haven't done the basics yet, I would start with that. I would start with an appropriately scaled resistance training program, and then maybe use HIIT later on down the line.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Okay.
But just in terms of type 2 diabetes, it is generally a good thing to do if it's appropriate for you. If it's appropriate for you, it's a great thing to do.
Okay, interesting. Megan, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, so somebody was asking if stress and anxiety are contributors to developing type 2 diabetes, and if you do have type 2 diabetes, are these worsening your condition?
So the short answer is it contributing to the condition? Absolutely, yes, it is. Stress and anxiety, it's actually a normal physiological reaction to become more insulin resistant, so more resistant to getting it for insulin to get glucose into our cells when we are stressed. People hypothesize, that's because, if you're stressed, you want to conserve energy, make more fat, because historically a stressful time would have been a time of bad survival. So, maybe that's why we get more insulin resistant. But the reality is, it definitely does. And actually, anyone who has a blood glucose monitor and uses that, if you have a bad night's sleep, which is obviously a stress, measure your fasting glucose, and it's likely to be quite a lot higher, even if you don't have diabetes, than when you do. So absolutely it does. Can it be causative by itself? Possibly, in some cases. Certainly anything's possible. It's most likely that when we have pathology that's reached the level of a diagnosis, it's actually more things contributing. But there may well be people where constant chronic stress is one of their issues. So if that is the case, if this is you, if you are constantly chronically stressed, that's a root cause. But we have to unpack that. Why are you constantly chronically stressed? What is that? Is that something that you can remove yourself from, or is it just something that you can't do anything about? We have to learn to change our perception of stress. Stress is a difficult one. I would say stress is the most difficult one, because most things you can control. So if I tell you to eat a different way, you can control that. If I tell you to exercise a different way, you can control that. Stress you can't necessarily control. That there are things you can do though to empower you more against it. So things like meditation, journaling, these and yoga, these have all been proven to help with stress. Actually, meditation has been shown to the flight or fight center in your brain. It's the amygdala. It's like a walnut-sized part of your brain, just the top of your spine. That's where perception of stress comes from. It's a very primitive part of your brain. Everything down to lizards have the fight or flight mechanism. Obviously, that's how you survive. And if you can change your perception to stress by meditating, it's actually been shown in fMRI to reduce the activity of that part of your brain. But it's not a quick fix. It's like training. You have to do it daily, and eventually you get better at it. So I would say absolutely yes to stress, but it would depend what the stress was. And I would like to definitely talk to someone about what their stress was and try and unpack that and help them with that. And then also the other stuff I say applies. If you're stressed, you can still build muscle. It might not be an optimal place to build muscle, but you can. That still would make a difference. That would still get you better blood glucose control. If you're stressed, you can still eat better, and that would still get you better blood glucose control. And bad blood glucose control is a stress. If your blood glucose is too high or too low, because you have poor glycemic control, your body will register it as a stress, and it will reduce stress hormones. There's every possibility that when you improve your diet or exercise, that your blood glucose control gets better. Maybe your stress will improve anyway. So all these things contribute together, which is why I say that there's no real one solution to anything, but yes, it can. In extreme cases, some people may need to sort of get counseling, but there's many things, even as a nutritional therapist. I'm trained in NLP, for instance, which can help with stress and anxiety and your perception of stress. You can't eliminate stress from your life, and it's not desirable to, and you actually want stress. Like, exercise is a stress that you adapt to and improve from, but it's just that chronic, low-lying chronic daily stress that's the issue, and you want to try and change your perception to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Dorian, what for me for stress reduction? I meditate. So as you said, meditation. What I'll find is, for example, I might have a day at work, and I might get a bit more stressed out than usual, and then I'll notice I didn't meditate this morning, and it honestly makes a difference. So it makes a huge difference. Sometimes I get a bit complacent. I won't meditate for 3-4 days in a row, and I notice I've started getting more stress. And as soon as I fix my sleep, just go to bed at the same time, and I'll wake up and I meditate. I'll be in the kitchen making my coffee, and I'll notice my hips are moving. I'm dancing. I'm dancing. I'm listening to music, and just something as simple as meditating. When you get really good at meditating, I don't know if you've learned this technique, but I've learned this technique where I do gratitude, and I can feel this shot of electricity moving up my body, and I've figured out how to trigger that automatically, and it just changes my day so much. What do you do, Dorian?
I actually really like meditation. I got the Headspace app.
Oh.
And that's that gives you like 10 free sessions, and that teaches you to meditate. And then I used Headspace pretty much daily for about 3 months, and that's sort of talking you through different types of meditation. And then I can that, and I got an app called Brain FM. None of these have any affiliation to us, but Brain FM, and that plays just music, and then I have sort of my own meditative practice. 100% it does work, but it's not something you'll see instantly or even over a week. You have to practice it. But I think you get sort of muscle memory in your brain like you do, because I find now when I go off the wagon for a bit and I come back, it works very quickly. For me, stress always manifests in poor sleep. And obviously, sleep is another thing. Sleep makes you more resilient to stress, but it's very easy to tell someone, be less stressed, or someone who can't sleep more, it's more difficult to do it. But I think you find that over time, if you work on these things, then there's absolutely tools to help you improve. And there are supplements as well that do work, like ashwagandha, for instance, makes you more resilient to stress. That actually blocks a pathway from producing stress hormones. So that actually does, and it's been shown in clinical trial to improve sleep, reduce cortisol, make you less stressed. There's lots of tools that you can use to help with these things. But like anything we talk about, it's everything that contributes to the result, rather than just one thing. And there's this sort of you go on the internet, and a lot of the stuff we talk about is in extreme camps. So everything with nutrition, there's extreme nutrition camps, there's extreme muscle building camps, there's extreme wellness camps. But you don't have to be, all of these people give useful things. Their solution is not the one solution. They're all the solution. You don't have to be a meditation hippie, and you don't have to be a hardcore bodybuilder, but you can take all those things and put them together and get results. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the absence of them is more important than it is more important to focus. I think it's more important to remove the absence of these elements. So mindfulness, nutrition, exercise, than it is to actually try and win an entire camp, because
you got it. Yeah,
you can't.
That's why I say don't Google anything, because you'll find someone who's gone on a diet and it changed their lives, and they're completely obsessed with that. Or they started lifting weights and they became a hardcore bodybuilder and it changed their lives. Or they started meditating. But actually, you don't need to go extreme in these directions. You just take these things are all healthy, and you can just take them all. And it's like when I say build muscle, especially women tend to not like that idea. But you're not going to look like a. I guarantee. I promise you.
I think muscular women are quite attractive. I'll be honest. I really do.
People don't really like muscular women. Is not a muscular woman. A woman's body fat should be relatively high in comparison to a man. Healthy women have over 20% body fat, and the movie stars that women look up to and the way they look, generally they're quite muscular for a woman. That's how you get the shape that women want as a woman. The arms and curves and everything like that. You achieve that by being muscular with a healthy body fat.
It's muscle. It's muscle, isn't it? It's not. It is muscle. That body you want is muscle.
That's exactly right. So the guys and girls you see that are freaks, that's generally they're genetic freaks, and usually some drugs involved in that as well. But generally, the way that most women want to look when they see an actress or something, generally she went and she lifted weights, that role. That's just the way it is. And, she's going to be in or around the healthy body fat. Women shouldn't have six-pack abs, really. Not if they're healthy or they want to keep their period. So, that's, that too extreme in any of these directions isn't what I would recommend, but taking them all together is and practicing them, like saying the admission of not doing them is worse than doing a bit of it, I think said, really.
Amen. Well,
so time for one more question, maybe?
One more question then.
So if someone had type 2 diabetes and they were looking at alternative health options, so instead of having something that's got a lot of sugar in it, they look for sweeteners instead. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this is actually a bad idea to go for these sweeteners, these artificial supplements instead of the real sugar?
Great question. And being a nutritional therapist, my answer might surprise you. I think the standard answer to artificial sweeteners with most nutritional therapists is an absolute no. I'm going to take a more nuanced approach and say it's absolutely context dependent. So the evidence on artificial sweeteners, it's kind of, there's some evidence that says it just changes your microbiome and stuff. And I suspect it probably does, but everything changes your microbiome. I think you change your microbiome just from sneezing, to be honest. So how much can we read into that? Not too much. Epidemiology, so the observational studies say that they do correlate with obesity. but I don't think they're causing obesity.
I don't
It might
think
be more of a behavioural thing.
I don't think that that's too much causation. Like I don't think that can be factually correct.
No, it's a correlation. It's not a causation, and I can go into that as well. And then the trials that we see, sort of short-term trials, we don't see an effect. So what I would say is, I'd say I'm not particularly. I don't think that we know perfectly well what these things do. I don't think they're toxic. I don't think they're going to give you disease. And when I say it's context dependent, I mean it depends on the person in front of me. I think obviously drinking something. So one thing they have seen is that usually people don't. This doesn't. When you take a drink, so you're taking a sweetened, non-sugary beverage instead of a Coke, say. You're replacing that calorific drink with a drink with no calories. What we see is it doesn't reduce your overall calorie load. So what people tend to do is they'll drink a Diet Coke instead of a Coke, and they'll make up for that calories in another meal. So it's not, in that way, it's not a weight loss tool. I would say the sweet taste, so aspartame is sweeter than sugar. And the sweet taste, I think, is, it can create bad behaviors with food. If you're eating whole foods, primarily, a Diet Coke tastes damn sweet. And if you're having that all the time, maybe blueberries all of a sudden don't taste so sweet. I think you'd be shocked when you cut out sugar and artificial sweeteners, how sweet blueberries or strawberries can taste, for instance. So I'm looking at this not from the actual consumption of Diet Coke or whatever it is itself. I'm looking from the context of behavior. What's it going to do behaviorally? What's it going to do to your eating behavior? If you cut out artificial sweeteners completely, and that makes your food taste better, that makes you more consistent on a diet, I think that is a big win. If you're someone who can have Diet Coke or whatever here and there, and it's not going to change your eating behaviors, then that's another side of things. So it depends on the individual and their behaviors. I would say that most people find it very difficult to control cravings with artificial sweeteners. I'm one of those people. I think, we don't have good evidence. When we don't have great evidence, I like to refer to evolution, and we know that we weren't having diet sodas through our evolution. Doesn't mean it's toxic or anything like that. I just think maybe it's not something I should be drinking all the time. But I know when I drink them personally, other things don't taste so good. And, I don't crave them at all. But once I've had one, I really crave them. And I find a good way to break that is actually sparkling water. For some reason, the fizz as well makes it more craving. So I'm sorry, it's not a definitive answer, Megan. It's a nuanced answer. And it would depend upon the person. Eating is as much about behaviors as anything else. And, there are people who are fit, ripped, insulin sensitive, and they include artificial sweeteners in their diet, no problem. But maybe we're dealing with something very different in them compared to someone who maybe has had some bad food habits, and that's led to metabolic disease. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Quick question. Since quitting sugars, all these sort of things, now when I go back to them, I go to fizzy drinks and everything, I can taste it's too sweet. They're almost too sweet. I can taste everything inside them, and I find things like blueberry, fruit, stuff like that. I find they're perfectly satisfactory. However, I think something that a lot of people don't realize is that it's your tolerance. So your taste tolerance. If you are used to drinking or eating something that's so sweet, if you stop, and that means to get that same effect, that dopamine effect, the reward, you're going to have to go for things of that caliber. However, if you stop doing it, your top roof, your requirement's going to drop, and eventually, for me to be perfectly satisfied, it doesn't even have to be that sweet. Someone else might be like, that's not even a sweet, and your body adapts.
I agree with you 100%. I think the problem with most processed food, including fizzy drinks, is that they hack our sort of satiety mechanisms. They give us these amazing, sweet taste. I've got 3 kids, and believe it or not, when they were babies, not one of them liked sweets or sugar or things like, or juices even. And that's because, they're so sweet. Even for me now, who doesn't drink this stuff, if I have it on occasion, it's sickly sweet. You have to get used to it, and that becomes your normal. Now, in all honesty, Maxi, most people I see, if they had type 2 diabetes, I probably would be telling them to either most likely eliminate or severely cut back on artificial sweets. Not because it gave them diabetes, not because it's going to kill them, and not because it made them fat, but it's a behavior thing. And that would be my opinion. Maybe not all people, which is why I give a nuanced answer. I'll always leave room for nuance, but for most people. And when they improve their condition, getting control of their eating behaviors, then, once a while, that's going to be fine. So it all depends on the person and where they are in their journey on this stuff. But that's a very good question.
Okay. Well, Megan, do you have any quick questions before we finish? I think we've got to wrap this up soon so Zoom doesn't kick us out.
I don't think there's anything that could be answered quickly, but we'll definitely have a next podcast where we can answer a bit more things in detail.
Absolutely.
So just finish by saying, give us your questions, and there are no stupid questions. That's the first rule. The second rule is, maybe you're experiencing something. Maybe you've got type 2 diabetes, or you think you might be at risk, or pre-diabetes, or whatever, and you're experiencing something you can't see on Google, you can't see on Healthline, you've got some weird symptom. There are no weird symptoms. There's always a reason. So, please ask us any questions you have. I'll be more than happy to answer. And I hope you found this helpful.
Thank you very much, guys. And leave your questions below. And, this is BioSpan, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.